Hey, and welcome back. Over the years, I've always had a need for a great and reliable kick drum microphone. Whether it's for recording at home or taking with me to a gig for live sound reinforcement, a kick drum microphone is an essential piece of equipment in my arsenal. There's tons of options on the market, and I've been lucky to try and own a number of those different options. Most recently, I acquired this V-Kick from SE Electronics. I initially heard about this mic from the great Aaron Sterling talking about it on his Instagram.
If I could have done yesterday's video all over again, I'd do it with this mic. Man, I've been needing to check this mic out for a while. Wow. Far superior than this. This poor little guy. I don't feel bad for you at all because Shure's been killing it for years. You guys will be fine. This thing's amazing. It's punchy. It's all the stuff you want. And I'll tell you something else. This thing that looks like a gimmick, not a gimmick. Actually extremely useful. All these little EQ curves.
This was enough to get me intrigued, but SC has also been a great company to work with and a supporter of my channel in the past. So I was eager to return the support and purchase this microphone. I thought it'd be a fun exercise to test this microphone alongside a number of other microphones I already own and see what we can take away from each, and also see where I'd rate these microphones up against each other. So in addition to the V-Kick, we'll be taking a look at a series of other microphones, starting off with the Shure Beta52a. This mic is an industry standard for this sort of application, and I've owned this one for about 7 years, and it's been a workhorse for me in my studio. Next, we'll check out the One MK1000. This is a budget microphone option, which I believe is part of the house brand for Musician's Friend. This was the first kick drum microphone I ever bought, and I distinctly remember picking it up as part of their Deal of the Day offer. I've had this microphone for probably 10 years or longer now, and it's still the one I leave in my hardware bag to take to gigs. Next up is the Electro-Voice RE20. This is an industry standard broadcast microphone, but it also has a great reputation for low frequency applications like bass amps, floor toms, and of course bass drums. I've mostly had experience using this mic on my bass drum in a jazz setting, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it shapes up against these in a more traditional kick setting. Next, we'll move on to the Shure SM57. And while this isn't a traditional bass drum microphone, I've seen it used in this way, and it's easily one of the most versatile and trusted microphones for almost any application. Finally, we'll be checking out the Behringer BA19a, which, although this is not nearly the same as any of these other microphones, given that it's a boundary microphone, I've used it as a sole kick mic option for both live and studio applications. I recorded all these mics directly into my interface at the same input level, with the exception of the Behringer because it requires phantom power. These bass drum stems are raw, without any compression or EQ, but I did add some light EQ on the snare and overhead mic. I'd probably never use any of these microphones without adding something like EQ, compression, or other processing, but I wanted to try and provide a transparent sample for comparison. So without further ado, let's take a listen to all of these microphones individually and in a side-by-side setting. Once the demo wraps up, I'll give you some of my thoughts on each of these microphones, and we'll compare how they stack against each other in a few categories. Well, there you have it. I have to reiterate that I don't think any of these mics are really being showcased in their best light without taking advantage of at least some light processing or EQ, but I think you at least get some sort of picture of where each one stands. When it comes to sound, I think there's a lot of personal preference that goes into this, but I personally enjoyed the V-Kick, BA19a, and the MK1000 the most. Now I'm smart enough to recognize it's really not a fair assessment because the BA19a is so unique, and the V-Kick and MK1000 have a bit of a pre-EQ'd setup to them. I think the Beta52 and the RE20 are probably more neutral microphones that you can take and get a clean, true sound and then color it yourself with effects and processing, and this is probably more important in a studio setting. But maybe in a live situation, I'd prefer the lightly colored mic to save me some work in a sound check. The SM57 isn't bad, but it's clearly better suited in other situations. Now, if that's all that went into picking a microphone, I think we'd have our answer already on these mics, but I also like to consider a few other factors. One of the more important factors and practical matters would be the price. The most expensive of these microphones is the EV RE20, coming in at around $450 new. Next is the SE V-Kick at $220, followed by the Shure Beta52 coming in at $190, then the Shure SM57 at $100, moving on to the Gear One MK1000, which these days is coming in at $90 with a mic stand and cable, but I was able to score this one for $10 as one of Musician's Friend's Deal of the Day promo. And finally, the Behringer BA19a coming in at $74. There's a huge gap in price range, and I think it's something you'd have to seriously consider when you choose which of these you'd be most inclined to pick up. But I do have to say, for two of the cheapest mics on that list to be two of the ones I enjoyed sonically the most, I think that's a great deal. Another factor I'd consider would be convenience. When it comes time to gig, I always appreciate a mic that's discreet and a small form factor. With this in mind, I really appreciate the V-Kick and the MK1000. They are both pretty small and not too heavy. I oftentimes like to mount my kick mic off of an internal bracket or a rim-mounted boom. And when I've used the Beta52, it's been quite hard to get it in position to work with one of those mounts and a porthole. The RE20 is probably the most bulky and awkward of all these mics, but I don't think it's really designed to be used on stage. Probably the most convenient of all these would be the BA19a, since all you have to do is plug it in and drop it inside of your bass drum on a blanket, pillow, or towel. And honestly, that stuff's already in most of our bass drums. Something like this is nice because it saves you on having to get an extra stand or anything to mount it with, and another thing to lose when you're going to and from a gig. I think the last factor I'd consider on all these microphones is versatility. Obviously the most versatile of all these mics, and probably one of the most versatile microphones in the world, is the SM57. And even though it wasn't my favorite of the mics we heard today for a bass drum, I think it could handle the job in a pinch and probably be responsible for any instrument or scenario I could think of in a studio or on a gig. The RE20 also has tons of applications, even outside of low frequency settings. The BA19a can be pretty versatile for some unique applications like piano or theater settings, but one thing that makes it tricky for bass drum is that it's pretty useless without a way to get your mic inside the bass drum. I have a few kits and settings where I don't have a porthole or access to the inside of my bass drum, and the BA19a won't be extremely practical for those scenarios. The V-Kick, Beta52, MK1000 are all probably a little more tailored to their specific circumstance, but I think it does that exceptionally well. So obviously with all of these factors in mind, I think it's hard for me to tell you which one is objectively better than the other, but I will say as somebody who has owned all of these mics, I think the V-Kick and Beta52 are excellent professional level options for a dedicated bass drum mic. I think they are generally pretty true colored mics, and the V-Kick does give you some options on the back to adjust EQ curves in different settings. On a budget, I think the Behringer and Gear One are surprisingly effective and come in at a very affordable price range. And while the RE20 and SM57 are better suited for other applications in my mind, I do like that in a pinch or for a different sound, I could easily throw that on the bass drum and find success. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment of which mic you'd choose and which ones you'd like to add to your arsenal. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on future video releases. Until next time, thanks.